One of the things that I've always believed in is trying to learn from history. We here at the school, the Barristers Inn in Boise, talk every Monday among ourselves. 7 or 8 of us will get together and we'll talk about our own experiences, and we'll talk about historical experiences and how they apply and how we can use them in the courtroom. We'll take a case from a Claude Potts or a Rick or a Bob or a George, and we'll discuss it and we'll talk about it. And before we go to sentencing and before we go into the courtroom, we'll talk strategy and we'll get ideas. Some of the ideas and some of the things that we've learned over a period of time, probably you've heard of yourself, and maybe you just haven't thought about them recently. Let me give you an illustration. You remember a fellow named Sergeant York? There was a movie made about a Sergeant York who came from Tennessee. I think he was a farmer or something down there, and he went into the army and he went over to Germany. And while he was there, whether they were fighting in France or Germany, I don't remember, but he captured 100 of the enemy. Now, there was something about that particular man that was different and unique than it was with the Germans that he captured or with his fellows out in the field, because not everyone captures 100 Germans. And I know you may say, well, not everybody can. Well, can you capture or kill 20 or 30 of the enemy, or 10 or 15? I know here in Boise we have a real problem with our police, because it takes 5 Boise policemen to give a ticket to a housewife from Cuna. We are dealing with such incredible cowardice in Boise that it's frightening. I've never witnessed such cowardice in all of my life and never thought that I ever would. And 2 illustrations of that was with one of our secretaries down at the school, who, when she demanded probable cause, a Fourth Amendment warrant, and an attorney or a lawyer or counsel present, this policeman called in several more cars, and there was a total of 7 policemen who drug her from her car, arrested her, handcuffed her, and hauled her off to jail. Now, I don't know how many policemen it takes to arrest a housewife, but how many do you suppose it would take to arrest a bank robber or a real criminal or somebody that was serious and had a gun and said, wait a minute, I'm not going to submit to this? I've known of 2 or 3 instances where they've called 2 or 3 cars out and there have been 5 policemen there to give me a ticket. And I sit here and I wonder to myself, my God, Dad, what is it about these men that make them so fearful of an ordinary housewife or an average ordinary citizen? I've known of 2 or 3 instances where they've called 2 or 3 cars out and there have been 5 policemen there to give me a ticket. And I sit here and I wonder to myself, my God, Dad, what is it about these men that make them so fearful of an ordinary housewife or an average ordinary citizen? I'm not known to be armed, and I'm not known to be a crazed criminal or killer. I don't think I've ever carried a concealed weapon, and I'm not known to carry guns at all. And I thought about this Sergeant York story, and I said to myself, I wonder if there are any parallels in history or perhaps in Bible prophecy or something that would give us a clue as to what we're facing. What kind of an animal is this that we're dealing with? Well, not long ago, I noticed a story in the paper about a tax striker out in Dakota. It was either North or South Dakota. And assuming that the newspaper stories are anywhere near accurate, I guess this fellow had gotten in a gun battle with the police, and he'd killed a couple of the police, and when they came out to get him, the Idaho Statesman said that they took a tank and 100 men and went out to this guy's farmhouse and just blew it to pieces with small arms fire. And I thought to myself for a moment, I said, now, why does it take 100 policemen to go out and capture or kill one criminal? Is there any place in history where we might get an inkling? On the one hand, we have a Sergeant York, an American of about 1914 to 1918 vintage. He goes out and captures 100 Germans by himself. And then we have a man up in North Dakota in which it requires now 100 government agents with a tank, no less, to go out and capture one criminal. And I said to myself, I I think I remember a story like that, and I'd like to relate it to you. It's found in an obscure old-timey book called Leviticus, and it's about Leviticus 26, verse 8. Note that down, because what you're going to hear will just blow you away. Whoever this is speaking, and I'm going to assume that it's God because it seems to claim in the context here that it's God, he's talking to these people about some blessings, and he says to them, and 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight, and your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. And I thought about that, and I said, well, gosh, that sounds like Sergeant York, you know. Now, that's a little above average. Actually, it's supposed to take 10 men to go capture or kill 100 of the enemy. And I said, well, maybe this guy York is a more righteous man than the average, ordinary, run-of-the-mill American of that day. In that time, it took normally 10 Americans to catch 100 Germans, but York was a little more righteous. It only took 1 of him. What does that tell you of the character and the general demeanor, then, of our public servants in office when it requires 100 of them to go out and catch 1 criminal? That's assuming that he's a criminal. Now, I don't know much about that particular case. All I know is what I read in the paper. What does it tell you about the character of the average policeman in Boise, Idaho, when it takes 7 of those uniformed thugs to arrest 1 housewife? And she wasn't even resisting. What would they do if they did meet some resistance? What would the entirety of the Boise Police Department do if they were confronted with 1 righteous man? Just 1. Just 1 Sergeant York. So as I look at that, I say to myself, aha, we're beginning to get a clue. And so here at our school, from time to time, we do look in Scripture to see whether or not there's an example that we can follow. What we're faced with is incredible cowardice on the part of our enemies. And we're faced with that kind of cowardice because they're unrighteous men. And as I said, the fathers of our Constitution, the founders of our country, were fair to middle and righteous men. Now, whether they were the kind of righteous men of the Sergeant York variety, and that's assuming that he's a righteous man, I don't know. But you know, the Scripture does talk about some people, like David was called a man after God's own heart, and this fellow Abraham, he was talked about as being a righteous man, and this fellow Joseph, he was talked about as being a fair to middling righteous man. Those were people that kept the 10 Commandments, obeyed God, and they were free. They were the kind of people that you couldn't intimidate, and I equate this way. I think that the more people obey and keep the 10 Commandments, the more righteous they are, and the more righteous people, you're unable to intimidate, threaten, coerce, and scare them. Now, whether that's true in every case, I don't want to make a comment. But I'm 40 years old, and it seems to me as I look at people, and I've had an opportunity to look at hundreds of people, if not thousands, in the business world, and who have worked in my factories and plants, and that I deal with here in school on a day-to-day basis. And I just try to take a look at how many Sergeant Yorks do we have. Damn few, let me tell you. But we seem to have a lot of people who are in government service, as an example, and I think they probably go to church, and I think they look upon themselves as being fair to middle and nice people. But we have a problem here with public servants when we need 100 of them to go out and catch 1 man. And I don't think those are the kinds of public servants that we want in power and in office. And the reason for that is I don't think they're righteous men. If they were, it would only take, 5 to go out. I think 5 men ought to be able to go out and catch 1 criminal. I don't think it takes 100, and I don't think they need a tank. And certainly if they need a tank, well, what are they going out looking for? Now, from time to time I see in the paper these mass demonstrations, at these nuclear submarine yards, and more recently we saw one down at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory down in California, where about 3,000 people, this is the way I saw in the 6 o'clock news anyway, they went down there and the police arrested them and they put them in a big tent down there, and they had them for about a week, and when they got through with them for a week, I think they all agreed to pay a $50 fine or so. I'd say, well, let's see now. How much profit did the government make off of that little escapade? You got, what was it, $3,000 and a $50 fine? That's 000. Looks like about $150,000. Looks like to me that county government would like to have about 2 of those demonstrations a month. $150,000 per demonstration. Let's see, that'd be $300,000 a month. Gosh, if we multiplied that by 10, what would we have? Gosh, we'd have $3,600,000 a year. Yeah, I think that county would like to have that kind of demonstration twice a month, don't you? You see, those people went down there and they thought that they were going to cut a fat hog. But let me ask you a question. They all paid a $50 fine. Lawrence Radiation Lab is still there. The county is $150,000 richer. I doubt seriously that they had very much expense in handling the whole thing. I think if you deducted expenses, they probably netted $100,000 that they normally would be gigging the taxpayers for. What do you suppose would happen if those 3,000 citizens had all walked into that court and said, I demand a jury trial at the common law. I demand all of my rights at all times, and I waive none of my rights at any time. And if anybody does deprive me of any of my civil or constitutional rights, I'll take appropriate action under Title 42, Section 1983. And I'd like every member of this court to know and to take judicial notice that I'm a citizen at the common law and that I reject any and all mercantile equity. Now there's a nifty little speech. How do you think that county would stage 3,000 civil trials at $1,000 each? Let's see, 3,000. That would cost that county $3 million, wouldn't it? How long do you think that county could lock up 3,000 citizens and try them with 3,000 trials at $1,000 a copy, which is a good cheap trial? And let's just say that only 100 of those citizens had their rights violated, and 100 of those citizens filed suit for $500,000 each against policemen that broke their arms or beat them up or in some way put a mark on them. How long do you think that government could oppress those people? They wouldn't make it the first time. That's how that case could come down. You see, when you're looking at every circumstance, every time, you must be looking for, how do I get the most bang for the buck? Now, I'm not taking sides, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm pro or anti-nuclear, that I'm pro-nuclear power, anti. That's not the issue. What I'm saying is, I look in my newspapers just like you do, and I sit here and I put into my computer and I say, well, wait a minute, how could those people who were just defeated have converted that defeat into victory? What would it require of them? Well, let me tell you, it doesn't require 3,000 of those people to go to court. My God, 100 of those people, if they were to demand jury trials, and only 5 of them were to bring suits for $500,000 apiece, would bring a change. I don't know what kind of a change, I'm just telling you, would bring a change in the methodology of the handling of those types of protests. So when I look at that, I say to myself, I know that money is the bottom line each and every time. And since money is the bottom line, we've got to deprive them of the most money for the least cost each and every time that we go into that war. Now, if we come up with that kind of strategy and philosophy, then we have to assume that our adversaries are just as smart as we are. And I heard on the street one day that the judges in Ada County have decided that they've got to hurt us. I thought my public servants were working for me. It's almost as if my kids are downstairs in the living room saying, how can we hurt Dad? I didn't think we had that kind of a relationship, but my friend, I'm afraid that we do. So, some of my friends and colleagues said, you know, George, they're going to kill you. They're going to lock you up in prison. They're going to do to you what they do to everyone who becomes a renegade or breaks the form of the system. They're going to put you in the penitentiary. Well, gee, I'd be in real good company. Do you know that some of the best people on earth have been in jail? Guys like the Apostle Paul and James and Peter, and Stephen was stoned to death, and Christ was killed, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and a dozen and hundreds, and, you know, 6 million Jews were put in concentration camps and called criminals. And I sit here and I say, well, looks like to me I might be in good company. Do you know that every one of those 58 signers of the Declaration of Independence would have gone to prison had they been captured, or they would have been worse, hung, because they were all guilty of treason? Well, if that's the case, and if we're going to sit back and say, well, we better not do anything because, gosh, if we do something, why, our government's liable to put us in jail, and, gee, they might hurt us in some way. Well, for those that are timid like that, I'm afraid that perhaps you shouldn't be in this fight. And I look upon these 3,000 people down here at the Lawrence Radiation Lab. They're probably very sincere people. But they're not the Sergeant York type of people, and they are timid people. You see, it requires thousands of them in order to take action. Anytime you have to get into a mob, anytime it takes 7 policemen to arrest a housewife, it requires this mob to justify their actions because they're small, petty, fearful, cowardly men. And when it takes 3,000 to go down here in this mass demonstration, it's because there doesn't seem to be one righteous man in the entire group of 3,000 who will go down there and take that issue into court and litigate it. Or 10. Why does it take 3,000? I don't know of 3,000 citizens here in Ada County that are doing what we're doing now. And I'd say that because there aren't 3,000 citizens, I only need 10 or 15. You give me 10 or 15 righteous men, and I'll show you something that's unique and interesting. I'll show you how to make your government servants sit up and take notes. Now let me show you why it is that it doesn't take thousands upon thousands. I know that we've been waiting for 20 years for our government to give us back our gold and silver, and they still haven't done it. And I sit here and I say, well, gosh, what are we waiting for? 4 million, then 8 million, then 20 million, 30 million. We have to have 30 million citizens. We have to band together in some kind of a gigantic organization to get something done. Let me read you a little story here that came out of an ancient old-timey country called Israel about 1200 BC. And there was a man in this land, his name was Gideon. And this fellow Gideon was not an exceptionally or an outstandingly righteous fellow. And you can read the story here. It's in Judges 6 through 9. I just want to read you one little section over here out of Judges 7. Because here in Boise, we take a look at this and we say, how can we learn from this? Do we need thousands of people to do this to make meaningful change, or can a few of us do it? Well, starting here in chapter 7, verse 1, it says, Then Gideon and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well at Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. Now, these people are in national captivity. They're being oppressed by a foreign power, or by the people that are within the country. I don't know exactly what the political circumstances were at that time, but in some way or another, either the IRS or the EPA and OSHA has banded together and oppressed these people in some way. So the Eternal said to Gideon, he said, the people that are with you are too many, Gideon. Too many for me to give the Midianites into your hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore, Gideon, you go up to and proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. Okay, so you had 32,000 people. And we find this all the time. You know, we have people that call us on the telephone and they say, boy, I just really believe in what you're doing there, Mr. Gordon, and how can I join you? Well, I always tell them, you can't join me. You're going to have to learn to be a citizen of and by yourself. You're going to have to learn how to do whatever it is you want to do in life by yourself. I'm not going to hold your hand. But we took a look at this particular section. We said, here's 32,000 people, and here's God himself says, all of you who are faint-hearted and can't go to jail for a year, all of you who are afraid to go to an IRS audit, and all of you who are afraid to throw the ocean inspector out, you people leave our ranks and you go back home. And so that's what we've done here. Now going on, and the Eternal said unto Gideon, here in verse 4, the people are yet too many. 10,000 here, you got too many people here. Bring them down into the water, and I'll try them for you down there. And it shall be that of whom I say to you, this shall go with you, and some shall go with you, and whomsoever I say unto you, this shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So here's God. He's telling Gideon, I'm going to separate between the men and the boys here. So he brought these people. That's the 10,000 of them. Let's write down 10,000 here. So he takes 10,000 of them down by the river. And he says, everyone that laps up the water with his tongue as a dog laps, him shall you set by himself. So those that get down and drink water, you put them over here in one group. And likewise, everyone that bows down upon his knees to drink, you put them over here in another group. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. Okay, so out of 10,000, we're down to 300. And the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save your rear ends, troops, and deliver the Midianites into your hand, and let all the other people go, every man to his place. And so the people took food in their hand and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. Okay? Now here's how many we got left. You got 300 men plus one leader. That's 301 guys. Okay? We started out with 32,000, and we were about to go to war. Now we're down to 301. 6 weeks later, over here in Judges 8, verse 10, and I'm guesstimating 6 weeks, it might have been as much as 90 days. In verse 10 it says, now Zebah and Zolminiah were in Korkah, and their hosts with them, about 15,000 men. 15,000. These are enemy troops. All that were left of the hosts of the children of the east. By this time, over here in chapter 8, verse 10, there's 15,000 left, for there fell 120,000 men that drew the sword. There's 120,000 men. Gideon and his boys killed 120,000 men in 6 weeks. Now I would say those are the kind of people of the Sergeant York variety. I don't think that it would take 7 of those guys to arrest a housewife from Kuna, Idaho. One of these guys killed 500 enemy troops with the jawbone of an ass. And there was another story of another guy over here did the same thing. His name was Samson. That guy was so tough, he had to back up about 50 yards to let the bodies build up over here while he was killing them. In our country today, it takes 100 of these public servants to go out and catch one man. And I'm sitting here saying, we are certainly not spending our money wisely if it takes that many people to go out and catch one. I would rather hire 10 or 15 of these Sergeant Yorks because it would be a whole lot cheaper for us. And then it wouldn't be nearly so fearsome. I think that one policeman should be able to give a ticket or arrest one housewife. And by golly, if it takes any more than one policeman to arrest one housewife, we're not getting our money's worth. Now, there's another interesting story that we can learn from, and it's over here in a book. It's kind of an obscure old-timey book, too, and it's called the Book of Job, because I learned this story some years ago, and it kind of stuck with me. And as I said, I'm not all that religious, but I'm just kind of religious. I look at this book here, and I say to myself, my common sense tells me that what I'm doing makes sense because it works, not because I'm religious and go to some tent camp riot on Wednesday night. But there are some down-to-earth, plain everyday garden variety historical cases here of the way other people behaved and handled a particular problem. And when I'm up against OSHA and the EPA, do you know that IRS gang? I don't know how many agents they have, but I was up here in one of our local offices, and they had a divider in there, and my friend looked over the divider, and he counted 38 cases of .38 caliber ammunition in an IRS office. And he said, George, come here. And I went over, and I looked over, and I said to myself, why on earth would civilian employees of a domestic government agency need 38 cases of .38 caliber ammunition? And so when the IRS lady came in, we asked her that question. And she was just embarrassed to tears to think that we were so nosy that we would look over that. Now those guys are about the most nosy people in the world. I don't know of anybody in any branch of government nosier than an IRS agent, and here was this nosy IRS agent trying to ask me why I was nosy and looked over in my office and looked over at all of my ammunition. Lady, why did you spend my money buying all that ammunition over there? Are we preparing for war? Who are we going to war against? Well, I guess it takes that much ammunition to go up and catch one man. And I think that the purpose for doing that is to scare and intimidate people into believing that we'll kill you, we'll throw you in prison for 20 years if you resist us. Well, when people behave like that, it's obvious that they're tyrants. I don't have to behave like that. I don't need 20 people to run out here and face an IRS audit. I don't need 10 of my friends. I can walk right in there and talk to them just eyeball to eyeball. Hi, friends, sit down over here. Let's talk law. So anyway, there are some people, and they're nice people, and they're real concerned about me, and they're real concerned about Bob and some others. And so we were taking a look here, and I wanted to read you this story. This is a hilarious story when you see it in its real context. Over here in Job, it's in chapter 1. I'll start in verse 6, and it says, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Eternal, and Satan came also among them. You know, I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute. Let's draw a picture of this, shall we? There was a day when the sons of God came. Well, now, who are these sons of God? Well, I don't know who they are, but whoever they are, Satan was with them. So they used the word sons, plural, so there must have been two of them. So there had to be two sons of God, and then Satan comes along. That's three guys, and they did what? They came to present themselves before God. Now, all I know is that when the IRS calls me in, they call me to present myself before them. And when I walk into their office, it looks like I'm the citizen who walks in and presents myself before my IRS agent. And I thought, now this is strange. Satan and two other guys, at least, are walking up and presenting themselves to God. All right, now let's go on. And the Eternal said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? In other words, he's saying to him, where'd you come from? And Satan answered the Lord and said, well, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down in it. I've been going up and down in the earth and raising hell, doing my thing. And the Eternal said unto Satan, well, have you considered my servant Harriet or Bill, or in this case Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that fears God and eschews evil. So whoever this guy Job is, he does something that's strange and unique, and he's somebody who is a perfect and an upright man. Sounds to me kind of like a Sergeant York type, kind of like one of you will chase 10 of them. And Satan answered the Eternal and said, well, does Job fear God for no reason? Haven't you made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he has on every side? and hath blessed the work of his hands, and the substance or his substance is increased in the land. But if you'll put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, he'll curse you to your face. And so the Eternal said unto Satan, Behold, all that he has in your power, only upon himself put not your hand. So Satan went forth in the presence of the Eternal. Now you know there's something different about that story. Now that isn't some weak-kneed, spineless, jellyfish, long-haired, aquiline-faced Christ, who's coming along saying, Oh, won't you come and give your heart to me today and your pocketbook to the preacher. Sounds like to me that we've got some kind of a person here who's in charge. And this chief executive called God calls in certain people, and these people come into his office, and he says, Hey, dummy, have you seen my servant George over there? Or have you seen my servant Job, or Bill, or Sarah, or Pete? Well, yeah, I've seen them, but those guys, you've given them good jobs and everything, and they've got houses and cars, and, they've got all these nifty chariots. And so here's the one key thing I noted over here. It says, you go do whatever you want with that guy, but don't touch him. Now that seems like to me a command from God to Satan, you better not touch George Gordon. I've come to the conclusion I don't think those guys can touch me without God's permission. Now let's go on and see whether or not that's really true and if that'll work. Now over here in chapter 2, after he lost all of his wealth, again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Eternal, and Satan also among them to present himself before the Eternal. So here's Satan, he comes to present himself before the Eternal. That kind of reminded me of the old days when I was in the business world. I used to sit in my office behind the desk, and I would pick up my phone, and I would call my servants into my office. And I would say, sit down over here. You, the manager of production, and you, the sales manager, and you, present yourselves before me and give an accounting of yourselves. Why is production down? And why are sales down? Or why is this and that? And that's what I see here. I see God, the chief executive. He calls Satan into his office and he says, sit down, dummy. Let me inquire of you. And so the Eternal said to Satan, from whence comest thou? Well, gosh, that reminded me of what I used to say, to my sales manager. Where have you been? Have you been to Wyoming? And Satan answered the Eternal and said, well, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. And the Eternal said to Satan, well, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and eschews evil, and still he holds fast his integrity, although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause. So here's Satan. Now he brings himself before God, the boss. And this kind of reminds me of this Rick Mitchell I've got. Now here's Rick, he's in jail. He's lost his job. We've taken everything away from him. We've cast him in the king's dungeon, and still he won't fill out the damn 1040 form. Okay? And Satan answered the Eternal and said, skin for skin. Yeah, all that a man has will he give for his life. Just put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he'll curse you to your face. And so the Eternal said to Satan, behold, he's in your hand, that saved his life. Oh. Now it looks like to me that if Satan could kill this guy Job, he probably would have, because I don't think he liked him. I don't think. And I'll tell you why. He went out and he killed all of his servants, killed all of his children, took all of his wealth away from him. Now he goes out and curses him with boils. And when it's all said and done, the entire story for chapter 1 and 2 indicates to me that Satan didn't like Job at all. I don't think he cared for him. As a matter of fact, it indicated that he hated his guts. And it's for that reason that you see twice in here God says, yeah, but don't touch him. So I sit over here and I say, well, let me see here. If Satan has permission from God to kill me or to damage me in some way, then it looks like there's not very much I'm going to be able to do about it, so I might as well have a good time. pestering and tormenting my government officials, going to and fro in the earth, walking up and down in it, and harassing my government officials while I've got time. But if, on the other hand, he doesn't have permission to touch me, then I can thumb my nose at my government officials and tell them to go to hell because I don't think they can do anything to me. In any event, there isn't much that George Gordon is going to do to preserve George Gordon's life, because these people, if they go out and kill other people 100 to 1, and when they finally got this guy called down in Tennessee or Arkansas or someplace down there in the South, I don't know how many were there, but it seems to me that the paper said that there was about 100 of them when they did that. And I sit here and I go, wow, took 100 of them to get that criminal. I'm not even a criminal. I don't claim to be a righteous man, but I do claim that I'm not a criminal. So if I'm not a criminal, at least I'm not over on the wrong side of the issue. And what we see over here is, well, gosh, if we had some people that would keep the Ten Commandments and some fair to middle and righteous men, it looks like to me, based upon this Job story, if we look back in ancient history and we just take a look at the facts, looks like to me that we need not be too fearful of what they're going to do to us. Then if we take a look at another old-timey story and say, well, we don't need 32,000. I just need about 300 good men. About 300 good righteous men, I think, will turn things around here right side up. But there are some other tactics and techniques. Now with a little background, you know, we sit here, and I've got one more background story, and then I want to tell you a little about some techniques. There was a case where a guy named Nebuchadnezzar, now Nebuchadnezzar lived about 700 BC. I want to flip over here and read you this nifty little story because this will just blow you away. Most of you people that are going to watch these TV tapes probably know these stories better than I do. But this fellow Nebuchadnezzar, he had a big ego problem. He's got an ego problem that probably the IRS around here would be pikers, you know, if we compared them. Anyway, he had some kind of a religious hang-up, and he built some kind of a tower or some kind of a graven image, and they were suffering under this state church religion, kind of similar to what we have here in the United States. We have all of our churches incorporated by the state, and then we have all of our preachers licensed by the state. And I guess what that means is they have permission to do whatever it is the state will allow them to do in religious life. Nebuchadnezzar had something going similar to that. Anyway, I want to start over here. This is in Daniel 3, and I'm just going to break in to the story because here's three fellas. Now, these three guys are three guys like you've never seen before. When they walk, they must waddle. Because it says here in verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke to one of them, and he says, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not you serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I've set up? Now if you be ready," see this intimidation? "Now, when I put you in jail over here, anytime you're ready to fill out that form, I'll let you out of jail." See? That's the way I saw this. "Now if you be ready, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the this and that, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship that image which I have made, well, but if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" Boy, you talk about intimidation. I've never seen that yet in Ada County. Oh, I've seen a few judges say, "I'll throw you in jail until you swear this oath," or "I'll throw you in jail until you fill out that form." You know, but I haven't been threatened with death yet. And I sat here, you know, and we were talking about this at our last executive meeting, and I said, uh-oh, this could get real serious. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "Well, Neb, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace." and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods nor worship the golden image which you have set up. I'll tell you how I saw that. In plain language, if we use that in our everyday vernacular, I just want you to know, Judge, that I'm not going to sign that 1040 form, and I don't want to go to jail, but I'm not going to submit to your tyranny. Now, I think that that is pretty much an analogy of where this fellow Rick is. Now, what's going to happen to these three guys? Well, as the story goes on, they grabbed these three guys and threw them in the fiery furnace, and the story is that God saved them. But their attitude is the key to this example. They said, well, we don't really care whether or not God saves us or not. If He does, great, and if He doesn't, we're going to die in there. You see why it's so much more important to have 300 good men than 32,000 fearful and timid men. I'd rather be surrounded by the 300 good men, because the examples I see here in Scripture are such that it shows me that it requires a tremendous amount of character in order to do that. Not everyone is up to and can withstand this kind of intimidation, because I don't know how long Rick's going to be in jail. What if he was there 2 years from now? You know, we're all going to be sitting here saying, well, they can't do this. But it's like me telling you in the parking lot when I back into the back of your car or the side of your car and I wreck it. And then you say, wait a minute, you can't do that. Why, you just damaged my car. And I say, why don't you go to hell, and I drive off. What are you going to do about it? And so here's the IRS, these 14-foot-tall anakims running around here stealing $500 fines from you, from your employer, and using your employer because he's fearful and timid, and he can't stand up to these anakims, and he steals the $500. And you say, but you can't do this. This is taxation without due process of law. And I haven't had a court order. Oh, yeah, that's right, you haven't. But what are you going to do about it? And that's why I say, you know, it requires a certain amount of character. So I'm going to circle off this thing called character. When you get to the sentencing, that is, you know, now that we've gone through the trial and we've put all of our motions in, and we've qualified our case for Moses in Washington, D.C., and Judge Berger, we hope, is going to listen to our plea. What if he doesn't? Will you then capitulate? You see, the thing that we've got going in Boise that you may or may not have where you are is that I'm not going to tell you how many, but there are a number of citizens here in Boise, of which I've said, there are 3 of us, in addition to Rick, who are now ready to go to jail. Within the next 6 months, let me write that down. And I'm speaking to you now on the 7th day of the 7th month of 1983. There will be 4 of us in the Ada County Jail, or something less than 4. Either there's going to be 4 of us out there, and my question is, how long will you keep 4 citizens locked up in the Ada County Jail because they won't fill out that form? Well, now, in the next 6 months, what if we got 8? How long will you keep 8 citizens of Ada County in the Ada County Jail because they will not sit down, or they will not fall down and worship your gods, and they will not submit to your tyranny? You know, pretty soon, the message gets loud and clear. And there was a case of this Mahatma Gandhi, and if you get a chance, you should see this movie, Gandhi, because whether it's true or not, it's got some nifty lines in it, and you'll like some of those nifty lines in the courtroom. It's reported in the movie, at any rate, that he said in 1930 that you Englishmen are going to see the wisdom of your own folly, and you're going to leave this country of your own free will. That was about 1930. 17 years later, Lord Mountbatten settled the issue and the English left. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take, But I would say, based upon the good start that we got with the von Ellsworths and the others that began this in the 1960s, if we went to the 1970s and 80s, the 1990s, perhaps in another 17 years, our government officials will see the wisdom of ceasing and desisting in the tyranny that they're oppressing us with.